Good evening and welcome to Nashville. I'm Alan Jackson. Tonight, we're going to get to the bottom of something that's been disturbing to many Americans. The protest against the men and women who are trying to keep our cities safe and who are being literally shelled by protesters from coast to coast. How can it be that while known criminals, rapists, child traffickers, and dangerous murderers are being arrested and sent to jail or sent back home, others come out and protest on their behalf? They throw rocks at ICE agents, they run cars and trucks into the National Guard and local police, and they send cell phone alerts to let the bad guys know that the good guys are coming. Are the protesters actually in favor of more crime? Do they want the illegal drugs spreading in our young people? Are they okay with children as young as 6 and 8 being sold to sex traffickers? And who's behind all of this? How do they show up in such big numbers? Why do their signs look so familiar from city to city? And who pays for these people? Well, tonight we're joined by the Vice President and Executive Director of Research at the Government Accountability Institute, Seamus Bruner. Welcome back, Seamus.
Hey, Alan, it's great to see you.
Well, the recent shooting of the 2 National Guard troops from West Virginia drove home the point about how bad things have gotten. But the enemy is much bigger than those who came from Afghanistan and Venezuela's jails. The enemy is here in many shapes and sizes with a lot of different names, but chief among them is Antifa. Seamus, you've done a lot of investigating reporting on this, and you were even asked to give the president and other White House officials a report on what you found. So please start by telling us what you know about Antifa and what you told the White House.
Yeah, thank you so much. So what we know about Antifa, because you know Peter Schweitzer and our team, we follow the money. We followed it all the way to the top of what we're calling the protest industrial complex, or Riot Inc. is the shorthand we've given it. And what I told President Trump is that Riot Inc. is like many corporations. It has a lot of divisions. It's got a legal division. It's got the boots on the ground division. That's Antifa. But there are so many other parts of this beast that play a role in the protest industrial complex. Like I mentioned, the legal division, they've got lawyers that get these rioters, these violent criminals out of jail as quickly as possible and back on the streets to perpetrate more chaos. They've got a PR and media division that tells people all across the country there's no such thing as Antifa. It's a figment of your imagination. I mean, that's a major component in all of this. But the most important part of Riot Inc. is its investors. The investors are names you've heard of, people like George Soros and the Open Society Foundations, but a lot of names that people haven't heard of, like the Arabella Funding Network, the Tides Funding Network. People have heard of the Rockefeller Foundation. They are major investors in this whole ecosystem of chaos.
How do groups with that much money causing this much chaos stay below the radar? That's not an accident.
No, some of these groups have been at it for a very long time. These NGOs, things like the Open Society Foundation, Soros's network, that's been going for on 50 years. The Rockefeller network and the Carnegie, these go back to the early 1900s. Now, they weren't as radical back then. I mean, back when John D. Rockefeller set up the Rockefeller Foundation in 1904, they were actually doing good works, libraries, schools, hospitals type stuff. But generation by generation, power and money corrupts. And so now we're on the 4th, 5th, 6th generation on some of these things. And the children have gotten, and the people running these NGOs have gotten far more radical left. Even George Soros, I mean, people know that he's radical. Well, his son, Alex Soros, is even more radical than he is, and that's the man who is poised to take over. He's basically the heir apparent to the Soros dark money empire. He's, if you can believe it, even more radical than his father. So they've been doing it for a long time. They've learned that staying out of the headlines is best so they can do their dark schemes without all of the accountability and the transparency. And so they've gotten really good at it over the years.
Well, I know you've done a lot of research. How many other of these loosely woven groups are there involved in causing trouble?
There are dozens, if not hundreds. I mean, we've got several hundred on our list of various groups. Now, not all of them are assaulting law enforcement, perpetrating arson and all kinds of other mayhem and attacks. You know, some of them, like the ACLU and something called the National Lawyers Guild, they're part of the what we call the legal division of Riot Inc. You know, they would say that they're just doing First Amendment activities. But after bailing out these protesters, rioters, and violent criminals so many times, you have to assume that they know what they're doing here. They're getting the violent criminals back out onto the streets. And in one case we looked at, it was in Atlanta. It was called Stop Cop City. The vast majority of the rioters and the people perpetrating mayhem, now they were charged with domestic terrorism in that case. I mean, there was weapons and assaults on law enforcement, shootings, arsons, all of that. 48 out of 60 of these people who got charged were not even from Atlanta, so they're getting shepherded and shuttled around the country. We know that the Seattle rioters go to Portland, they go to Chicago, and it's basically a profession. You know, they're professional protesters, and they're getting paid by these investors in Riot Inc.
You know, it's not just these protesters, it's also a lot of Democratic politicians who are supporting the protesters. Is that simply Trump derangement syndrome? Because I can't imagine them running for re-election on more crime is good. Listen to how Stephen Miller describes what they're dealing with.
Joe Biden, the Biden administration, the Democrats have inflicted on this nation the worst national security threat in our history. We've never faced a threat like this. 20 million people brought into our country from the most failed societies on earth. Afghanistan, Somalia, Libya, Iraq, brought here. No vetting, no conditions, no rules. Brought here on visas, brought here as refugees, brought here as asylees, brought here as illegals, brought here in every way imaginable.
You know, even with the pushback in the mainstream media, do you think the American people on the whole understand the importance of cleaning up this mess?
I think everybody understands it instinctively and deep down in their gut. I think most Americans just can't believe that such lawlessness and just chaos is intentional. Unfortunately, it is. I mean, most good people, like the people listening to this show, can't imagine that there's billionaires who want to fund the destruction of the country, and yet they do it. And so the Riot Inc. side, what we noticed after looking into this for a long time, about 6 months, even longer in some cases, is that the investors in Riot Inc. are the exact same investors in what we call the immigration industrial complex. It's a huge business, moving 10 million people from wherever, all over the world, south of the border, but also Somalia and everywhere else. That costs a lot of money. And yes, you are paying for it. We taxpayers are paying for it, a lot of it, but it also requires a bunch of private cash. And so these same types, Soros types, the Arabella Funding Network, the Tides Network, they invest in the same NGOs that that are bringing the migrants and the asylees and parolees and all the different visa classes and illegals into the country. And we thought, well, that's strange. What's the overlap there? Well, when they've invested so much in bringing these people in, when they see the Trump administration starting to take immigration seriously, starting to mobilize ICE and Border Patrol and get deportations going, they unleash the shock troops. They unleash these foot soldiers, the Antifa types. That's why you see all these protests have a very distinct anti-ICE flavor to them. And, the spoiler alert on this is that they're also the same investors, these NGOs, in what we call the election industrial complex, the get out the vote machine that is eventually going to get these people, and we've seen it millions of cases, of all kinds of shenanigans in the elections, including getting non-citizens onto the voter rolls. Even if we're not talking about fraud here, we're also talking about apportionment, where California gets a dozen plus U.S. congressmen just because they have of all the non-citizens they have in their country, or in their state.
You know, the progressives are trying to argue that they're protecting the First Amendment, regardless of the violence. Is their idea to try to show the entire country through the liberal media that the Republican Party and President Trump in particular can't effectively govern with so much constant disruption? Is that the idea, just create action video for the shallow media?
Yeah, and well, in all patriotic Americans and everybody watching this show, we all support the First Amendment right to peacefully protest. We support, love and cherish the First Amendment right to free speech. And so, but this is not that. When you are funding criminal activity, arson, assaults on law enforcement, that is not peaceful protest. That is not, peaceful rights to assemble. That is criminality. And so when you've got these big NGOs funding arsons and riots and what President Trump calls domestic terrorism and what prosecutors have charged as domestic terrorism, we've got a real criminal conspiracy, it would appear.
Well, is it possible that these people think if they get enough people involved, they can start an insurrection?
That's what Stephen Miller is saying. He's saying this is seditious. And when you see the video, the famous Seditious Six video where people like Mark Kelly from Arizona are encouraging people within the military and within the intelligence community to resist orders from President Trump and from the Trump administration, giving no guidance as to whether the orders are actually lawful or not. They kind of keep it vague, intentionally so, and they say resist. They don't say go to your JAG officer if you're in the military and ask if you're getting lawful orders. That does seem and feel very seditious. And then on top of that, you add in all of the activity of the either American citizen rioters or the non-citizens. I mean, out in LA, there were some earlier this year really violent riots with arsons, and they were burning the Waymo taxi cars and all of the rest. These are perpetrated by non-citizens. So we've got basically an attack going on in this country.
Yeah, those videos suggest to the American people there's something happening that's illegal. It's inexcusable. Seamus, we need to take a short break. Can you stay for another segment?
Absolutely.
I'll be right back. We're back now with the Vice President of the Government Accountability Institute, Seamus Bruner. As I mentioned, you were called to the White House recently to brief the president and his top staff on what you've learned. Can you give us a sense of how that went and what the president was most interested in?
Yeah, it was a surreal experience. I had no idea that I'd be briefing President Trump until about 3 hours before the event itself. I had 24-hour notice that I'd be going to some building around the White House. I didn't even know I'd be going to the White House. And then we take the prep call the morning of that day, and they say, good news. Caroline Leavitt, press secretary, says, great news, President Trump's going to be there. So obviously my heart stopped for a second, thought, oh man, I better make this good. And I polished my notes, and I was so encouraged to see that President Trump and Attorney General Bondi, Director Patel, Stephen Miller was there, who's just, I think, carrying so much of the load in the administration. He's doing a great job. Secretary Noem of Homeland Security was there. So it was a kind of a surreal experience. And what was so encouraging about it is they all seem to be taking this very seriously. I've been in touch with their staff, sharing all of our findings, the follow the money stuff. I have to say that this is a big problem. The stuff we've just talked about, Alan, with billionaires funding, who they have armies of lawyers, and they hire the best lawyers, people who formerly worked at the DOJ. They know exactly how to kind of walk a very fine line between legal and illegal activity. So it's a tough nut to crack. I mean, like many people, you want this to be fixed right away. I understand that it takes time to build cases, but we've seen several since the White House event, the roundtable on Antifa. We've seen several arrests on domestic terrorism charges of these Antifa rioters who have assaulted law enforcement. There's events where they have shot at ICE. These radical leftists in this culture of political violence and extremism coming from almost entirely the left. Especially since Charlie Kirk, but I am encouraged to see the administration taking it seriously.
Well, GAI has made its name on following the money and then coming up with facts that can't be disputed. How much money is fueling this madness?
It's shocking amounts, Alan. It's it's in the billions. Just on the Riot Inc. side of the equation, we're talking about 300 million. And something we haven't talked about yet, and I was telling to President Trump, is your tax dollars are part of this. Because groups like the Rockefeller Foundation, even the Soros Open Society Foundations, they actually get taxpayer money. Now, the grants are very vague. You know, it's to do education-related activities, but the money's fungible. And so when you have $30 million go into, let's say, the Tides network, as has come from the federal government, they can take that 30 million and they can put it into whatever they want, and they'll say that it wasn't your taxpayer money funding this, but it freed up the money that is funding this, coming from the Soros types. So 300 million, I'd say, is a good ballpark on just the Riot Inc. side of things. But then when you get into the migrant resettlement, it's well north of $1 billion there of both private and public funds. And then when you get into the get out the vote and the election meddling and the election funding apparatus of this group of financiers, it is, again, north of $1 billion. And these are conservative estimates. These are just the receipts that we can pretty much tie to IRS Form 990 filings. But the more we dig, we just keep adding more money all the time, because there are just a dizzying number of groups that are both involved in the riots and the protests, as well as the migrant resettlement, as well as the getting out the vote apparatus.
I want to be sure I understand. I'm a simple guy. You're saying there's billions of dollars being spent to undermine the rule of law and to destabilize our government.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's good activities too, so I want to be fair. I mean, the ACLU will, I'm sure there's some good cases that they're taking up. It's not that every single dollar is going to criminality, but a large portion of it, and it's really hard to separate the good dollars spent from the bad dollars spent. So we're using totals and amounts that these groups have at their disposal. Whether they spend 90% on good activities or 90% on bad activities, that requires a deep analysis, which we're doing right now.
Well, did the president and Stephen Miller seem confident that they can turn this around before it gets even more out of control?
Yeah, well, it was a great moment. Secretary Rubio walked into the room and announced that the peace deal had been finalized. He was not at the meeting the whole time, but he had to come pull President Trump away to sign the peace deal in the Middle East, which was really a historic moment. But as Secretary Rubio was there, one of the reporters said that the Government Accountability Institute's talking about the foreign money, which, by the way, Alan, we haven't even talked about that. We'll probably need a whole nother segment for that. But the foreign money coming into this, the reporter said, President Trump, are you willing to consider labeling Antifa a foreign terrorist organization? And he said, and conveniently, Marco Rubio was there. He says, Marco, what do you think about that? Stephen, what do you think about that? Could we do that? And they said, well, look into it, Mr. President. Not 2 weeks later, President Trump had labeled various branches of Antifa a foreign terrorist organization, which gives a lot more financial tools. And I know that Secretary Besson at Treasury is all over this. They're looking into how to shut down the funding streams, looking into the tax-exempt status of the groups involved in funding chaos. So I'm confident that President Trump and his administration are working on this night and day.
Well, Seamus Bruner, thank you for your time today. Your guidance is right on target, and I hope people are able to process it and act on it appropriately. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, sir.
In a moment, the hope that does exist through it all. One of the characteristics of this present season is a dramatic increase in lawlessness. It's as if we've been unchecked for so long that now we're just unwilling to submit to the rule of law again. And I'd suggest to you that deception, lies, and a refusal to acknowledge the truth is a spiritual conflict more than it's a political one. And we better wake up. In this season, I believe the circumstances that allow evil to flourish will also create an opportunity for the kingdom of God to grow. Deception, wickedness, immorality, they're going to increase right alongside righteousness. The Spirit of God will move in dramatic ways. And you and I, we're going to have to decide where to focus our attention and where to invest ourselves. In our current season, candidly, I don't think we'll be able to sustain our faith without a heightened sense of purpose. See, God created you for a unique purpose. Let's determine to seek the Lord like we have never done before. If we'll do that, There's more reason for hope than despair, I promise. We'll be right back. Thank you for spending a few minutes of your day with us. If you ever miss a live episode, just a reminder, you can go to ajnow.com. There's a full archive there. You can watch the programs at your leisure. It's easy to share with a friend. You know, in a season when there's a lot of confusion and deception, a biblical worldview makes a great deal of difference. Let's be certain we stay centered on what God is doing. There's hope in that. I'm Alan Jackson, and you have a wonderful evening.